Good evening. I'm going to start out by saying the reason why I wanted to do this lesson is purely because I need this lesson. I've really been feeling the point of this lesson for some time now, and I figured if I need this lesson, then surely someone else needs this lesson too. So I'm going to be stepping on my toes a lot. If you feel like your toes are getting stepped on, good. Because I think that this is a problem that is plaguing Christianity as a whole. I can't really say for Roan Ridge. I don't think I actually know you all well enough to know specifically how this particular topic affects you. But in churches that I have either preached for or been a member of or grown up in, this is certainly a very big problem. And it's being vulnerable in a spiritual nature. This is very difficult for us. And I think part of it is because there are certain points of being spiritually vulnerable that are daunting to us. For instance, the idea that I have to go forward, that's an incredibly daunting thing for people, and I understand. And that's not all about being spiritually vulnerable. We're going to look at a couple of things. But first, I want you to look at some research by the Pew Research Group. If you've never heard of the Pew Research Group, they do lots of data collection from all different franchises of Christianity, and they collect all kinds of data, but the majority of their data is about trends of coming to churches, people who weren't spiritual or weren't religious at all, coming into churches, or changing types of churches or leaving churches. That's what most of their research is primarily about. And I want you to see this. This was a projection done by the Pew Research Group that they say in the next 50 years, and Pew Research Group, they clarified later that they said it could be as early as the next 20 to 30 years, we could fall below 50% of the American population being Christians. Right now, we're having more people leaving Christianity as a whole than are coming into Christianity as a whole. And we're going to, this doesn't really show it very much, but what we're actually seeing right now is that from being raised in the church to leaving the church before you're 30, that's at about 25%-ish for leaving. So about a fourth of people under the age of 30 who grew up religious leave by the time they're 30. And on top of that number, 34% of people, so right now the population is 64% of Americans are Christian. And if you'll see, that's actually what that says. I know this might be a little small, but right there it shows 64% as of 2020. Back in 1972, it was 90%. Now that's people claiming to be Christians, but still, this is people claiming to be Christians, 64%. And they say 34% are leaving in total, but we're only getting about 21% in from non-religious affiliation. So we're losing an average of 34% a year, and we're only gaining 21%. And so that's where a lot of these numbers are coming from. So if nothing changes about current trends by 2070, we'll still be at 54% of the American population will be Christians. With showing a steady decline, which seems statistically likely, right now we'll see 46% of the country will be Christians by 2070. And then the really bad one here, so just seeing it crash and burn, is that we'll be at 35%. And so I look at this, and of course my initial reaction is it's troubling. I would hope it's troubling to you. There was another graph that they put up that I thought was interesting, and I think might be able to help us flesh out what we're going to talk about later. And that is that there is an extremely large generation gap as well among Christians. So you'll notice people born 1928 to 1945, the silent generation, 84% of them claim to be Christian. 4% say non-Christian faith. So I actually think Pew Research Group includes Mormon in that group. So Mormon, Islam, Buddhist, Confucius, Taoist, that sort of thing. And then 10% are unaffiliated with a religious group. So notice they don't say atheist, but atheist, agnostic, that tends to go right there in that 10%. So notice how the size of that. I mean, 84% to me is an incredible number. And then we go just to the next generation, 46 to 64 baby boomers. That's my parents. 76%, with 6% non-Christian faith and 17% unaffiliated religiously. Generation X, 67% and 25%. And notice my generation, the millennials, 49%. I really feel that one. I was just having a conversation the other day, not just with PJ, but I've had this conversation with a few people, my wife included. And again, what the sort of gear of this sermon is about is how much I've been watching people. Before, when I was younger, when people left the faith, they were the adults. Sometimes I knew them, but wasn't really that close to them. They were probably in their 40s and 50s, and I was 10, 12, 15. It didn't really affect me as much. Now everybody I see leaving the faith is someone I know, someone I care about. And some of it's just so drastic, turn on a dime crazy. Two people that I know, they got married thinking the other one is a Christian, knowing they felt like they were atheists. They were both Bible studies majors at Florida College. After they got married, they sat down and had a talk, and the husband said, "Actually, I'm an atheist." And the wife said, "Oh, thank goodness, so am I." And now they're both atheists. I mean, that's the kind of turn on a dime stuff I'm talking about. If you also look here, they broke this up by generation as well, the percentage of people and their attendance. So 84% of the silent generation, 84% claim to be Christian, but 50% of them go weekly or more often. 10% once or twice a month. A few times a year, seldom, never. I find that one interesting because this is percent of U.S. adults. It's 12%, so it's 12% of all adults, religious and non-religious. So 12%. Notice 10% is unaffiliated. Isn't that interesting? 10% is unaffiliated, and yet 12% say they never go to services. And notice how much worse it gets. Silent generation, 50% attending weekly or more often. Baby boomers, 35%. Generation X, 32%. My generation, 22%. Attending once a week or more. And so it's been leading me to asking questions. But the problem is I can ask as many questions as I want. I don't necessarily know what the right question is. Perhaps the right question, and this is what actually prompted this lesson. Jill and I have been talking, I'll say, "Oh, do you know how such and such is doing spiritually?" That's a problem, isn't it? It's a problem that I'm asking it, not because I don't know, but because I'm asking Jill. I'm not asking them. I'm not looking for the answer from them. Maybe, why is this happening? No, that's actually not the right question either. How far is Satan going to go? None of these are actually the right question to fixing the problem. Looking inward, how am I doing spiritually? And looking at others, how are you doing spiritually? That's how we're going to fix this problem. We have to make each other be honest. And if you had the chance to meet her, we had a friend here. She said I could talk about this. But she came Friday. She was up for a wedding, but she decided to see us. We were in speech and debate at Florida College together, and she came Friday night to our meeting after we had dinner. And finally, I was like, after preparing this lesson, I get to actually live up to what I'm preaching to you tonight. So I just asked her, so, well, how are you doing spiritually? And she goes, funny you should ask. Lately, I've been feeling more milk than meat, and I need to change that. And I was, not that I was shocked with her, but just hearing an honest and open answer to that question was a little bit shocking. Because how often do we actually answer that question? How often, one, is that question ever asked us? And two, how often do we actually respond honestly? And then, how do you answer that question? How are you doing spiritually? I'm going 3 times a week to services. I read my Bible most days, or maybe every day. I read my Bible every day. Sometimes I'm praying. Is that the way to answer the question? And that's, again, this was that lesson at work. I finally get to ask her, and she gets to respond. And then we talked about it. Well, how are you going to do better? What do you want to do better? And so then we talked about a plan for her to implement. That's what happens when we're all being honest and open with each other. And I personally am tired of seeing people that I care about leave the most important thing in their lives. I'm tired of it. I'm sick of it. And I'm going to make it stop as best I can. How do we be more vulnerable? I'm not sure why my animations aren't working, but you know what? It's okay. The first thing we have to do is we have to actually be a family. That starts here at the local church, when the local church feels like a family, and then they start spreading that out to other local churches. It'll really feel like that. One thing, I believe I said this the first time I preached to you all, but something that I usually will, first time I'm preaching somewhere, maybe I'm doing a gospel meeting, I always start with, and I learned this from my dad, I know that I love everyone in that auditorium because we all love Christ and we all love God and we share in that. And so I already know that I care very deeply for you on that level. Yes, you're a human being. I should already care about you, but you and I agree on the most fundamental question of our entire lives. And that's just as good, if not better, than sharing blood. And you know what? Families don't always get along. I was the youngest of 4. I had 3 older sisters. When my sister said they were going to put together a slideshow at my wedding, I knew I was going to feel a lot of embarrassment. And, there were lots of things that, as we were looking at those pictures, there was lots of positive things. I thought about some of the negative things too. I remember that when they took that picture, I was yelling at them just a few seconds before that. Families don't always get along. But when you're not getting along, are they suddenly not your family anymore? Of course not. And for some reason, we allow that to happen in our churches. I'm having a beef with someone else, and now all of a sudden a church has split? Well, clearly you weren't a family, because families don't split over silly squabbles. People don't leave the family because something minor has happened that makes you change the way you see the family. Is that really why you leave your family? You leave your family when there is a fundamental problem that neither side is willing to give ground on. And even then, I don't think most of us would leave our families. But we're all too quick to do it in our churches. We are supposed to be one family. And even when we don't get along, suck it up and move on. It's more important to be a family. And you know what? When you're family, you're able to talk to people. Now, she and I, the girl I mentioned earlier in the illustration, we have always said that she and I feel like brother and sister. So I know that it would have been a little bit easier for her to open up to me than other people. But when we do feel like a family, it's easier to be vulnerable with our family. Why? Because it's less likely that they'll stop loving you. You feel that. I've learned things about my sisters I never dreamed that I would, because we're family. And they were willing to confide something in me. When we treat each other like a family, we're going to be more vulnerable. And that can be scary, but that's also a fantastic place to be. It's terrifying, but it's a good place to be. Another problem that I see in churches is not giving the benefit of the doubt. That's a big problem. Either when someone says something or does something, and we just want to go and assume the worst. And we don't typically do that with our families either. Sometimes we'll needle each other. Sometimes we'll give each other a sock on the arm. But at the end of the day, we're all still family. And we know that we love each other deep down. Even if that moment, it may not feel like it. But if we're actually acting and behaving as a family, then giving the benefit of the doubt is not difficult. And this is the idea of being merciful and compassionate, like we were talking earlier this morning. When you have a heart of mercy and of humility and of gentleness, then giving the benefit of the doubt is not hard. Why don't you go and ask them what they meant by what they said? Or why they did what they did? Why don't you go and ask that? Because 9 times out of 10, when you say what you said or what you did really hurt me, they're shocked. Have you ever noticed that? Maybe not, because maybe you don't go and have those conversations with people. I don't know. But when you do have that conversation, isn't it interesting? I'm so sorry. I didn't know that I hurt you. I didn't know that that was bothersome to you. How are we going to fix it? If you've never gotten a chance to have that conversation, I'm sorry, because that's a really good feeling moment right there. Because you realize you've built a bridge instead of a wall. The 2 passages I want us to look at tonight. The first one is James 5. James 5, turn there with me, please. Therefore, confess your sins to one another and pray for one another so that you may be healed. The effective prayer of a righteous man can accomplish much. And I want you to notice here, he is talking a little bit about physical issues, like being sick. He uses Elijah as an illustration. But what in the verse is the immediate context of the effective prayer of a righteous man can accomplish much? What is that? Being healed spiritually. That's the direct context. Yes, we're talking about when people are also healed physically. That's what it's talking about in 15. Restore the one who is sick. The Lord will raise him up, and if he has committed sins, they'll be forgiven him. And 17, he goes on to talk about Elijah actually having a very visceral reaction with his prayer by creating a drought. But right here in verse 16, confess your sins to one another and pray for one another so that you may be healed. Healed from what? We're just talking about physical illness? Of course not. We're talking about being healed on a spiritual level. And that comes by being a family. And guess what? This is the thing that I can guarantee you should be on your list of what's the biggest problem in the church, in Christianity. It's this one right here. Why? Because if we admit those things to ourselves, we have a problem. How often do you tell people the struggles that you have? How often do you tell people that you struggle with anger? That you struggle with vindictiveness? That you struggle with gossiping? That you struggle with lying? How often do you tell people about that? And those we'd consider the minor things. What about worse things? When was the last time you told someone, I'm having a lot of trouble because I'm really hating someone right now? Because we don't confess to each other, we don't often find the spiritual healing that is needed. And I can tell you right now, the reason why is when you are walking down that aisle to come to the front, you feel everyone's eyes. And the reason why everyone feels everyone else's judgment is because you probably would have given that judgment if the shoes were on the other feet. Like I said, I'm preaching to myself. I'm stepping on my toes. I've been like that. Oh, what are they going forward for? You know what? It really doesn't matter. You're probably going to find out. They're probably going to tell you. But even if not, I'm going to go and I'm going to pray for your spiritual healing. Because whatever is going on in your life, it's more important that you find your spiritual healing than for me to pass judgment upon you. And so we have trouble confessing to each other because we're afraid of the judgment. Last one, Galatians chapter 6. Galatians chapter 6. I said verse 2 here, but I want us to start in verse 1, please. Brethren, even if anyone is caught in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness, each one looking to yourself, so you too will not be tempted. Bear one another's burdens, and thereby fulfill the law of Christ. And then skip down to verse 5. For each one will bear his own load. We're going to bear our own load, but if we're sharing it, then whatever we're bearing is a little bit lighter. But I want you to note, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness, each one looking to yourself. And like I said before, I don't think I've been here long enough to feel that what I'm talking about right here with confessing to each other and showing compassion for each other, I don't know if that is exactly for Roan Ridge. If you think it is, take it and run with it. But I can tell you, I've seen that in other churches that I've been a part of. We have a problem showing compassion for one another, and then it's hard to confess our sins to each other. And then we're not giving people the benefit of the doubt, and we're not treating each other like family. It's all cyclical. Everything about who we are as Christians is cyclical. If I have a problem over here, it's going to create a problem over here. That's just the way this works. And Steve can be the first to tell you, when something is happening in one part of the body, other parts of the body are going to feel it. And sometimes you don't even know what the problem is until the problem is fixed. That's why a lot of people don't like chiropractors. I have grown up for the majority of my life hearing that chiropractors are just a bunch of scam artists. And finally, I had someone who was studying to be a chiropractor, and I said, okay, what's with everybody's feeling about you the way they do? And he said, I think what's happening is they finally reach a head where they need a chiropractor, and then you fix the problem, and then your body feels so good, it forgot about the problem. But that problem can come back really fast. And it feels like they never fixed it in the first place. But it's interesting how our body does that. Our body can feel certain kinds of pain to the point that we tune it out. And then we don't know the kind of horror it's racking upon our body until it gets so bad, I've got to go to a chiropractor. And I think that this is sort of what's going on here. Especially these bottom two, but really all four of them, they can be invisible pains that rack the body until you've got churches splitting. You've got people leaving. No one's communicating with each other. And everyone's suddenly in the same handbasket. Tonight, I need you to be asking the right question, either to me or to others. It's really helpful when you say it to yourself, but you don't know how helpful it can be to say it to someone else. There have been lots of counselors and psychologists and sociologists that have been noticing a certain trend, particularly in the last 20 to 30 years. In people. And it's the idea that when I ask, how are you? Anymore, we're not asking because we care. We're asking because it's polite. And when someone says, oh, here's what's going on, they deflate. I didn't actually want you to tell me. Now I got to stand here for 10 minutes while you yap on about what's going on in your life, and I've got problems too. We need to start learning that these questions, how are you? How are you doing? How are you doing spiritually? They need to be real questions. And part of this idea of treating each other like a family, I said I was going to come back to it. I know it might seem a little late in the lesson, but I talked about the generation gap earlier. And I think, and I'm going to lay the blame squarely at both groups' feet, okay? I'm not just up here being a young whippersnapper. We're going to lay the problem at both sides' feet. That is where some of the strongest miscommunication happens. The young people don't understand why the older people are wary. They don't have the experience of life. They haven't watched the corruption of the world long enough to know. I'm not even 30 yet. I hope I understand it, but I guarantee you I don't understand it like I should. But I think that's what's happening. The younger people see the older people are shooting down our ideas. They're just being really frank with us. They're not being very compassionate. And we have to remember that the youth need encouragement. And surely, especially you older people, surely you remember spending time with your grandparents. And I've had so many people in my parents' generation and the generations before talk about the wonderful times they were with their grandparents. You want to know why? Because that dynamic didn't exist. Grandparents don't let that dynamic happen with their grandchildren. We're going to play this game. It's so cool. I have no idea how to play, but we're going to play it anyway. That was the way my grandparents were, specifically my grandfather, the one grandfather that I knew. He was like that. But the problem is, too, young people, they've been around. It's not all unicorns and rainbows as much as we want it to be. It's not. And it's the job of the young people to dream, and it's the job of the old people to hold the kite string. They're holding that kite string for your benefit. They're doing it because they care about you, and sometimes that is not communicated well from both sides. And I think that this is all a bundle of mess that's all contributing to us watching the people that we love leave Christ. It's time for that to stop. It's time for us to own up and take responsibility. Because goodness knows, I haven't been taking enough responsibility. It's time I do. It's time you do as well. It's time for us to gird up our loins and do something about it. Because that's the problem. We're not communicating. We're not a family. And we have to be. When we're a family, it's so hard to leave. Because you realize how all of it interconnects, what God wants us to know, what those around us want us to know, how to be spiritual, how to think about this world without the world just wearing you down. The only way we overcome that is as a family. And that means giving people the benefit of the doubt. That means muddying through the hard times. That means confessing when we have problems. It means having compassion for each other. If we're not doing that, no wonder people in my generation are leaving in droves. I don't like ending sermons on down notes. So I'm not gonna. I've really been feeling this lesson. And if you feel like I haven't been doing as good a job in the recent time, because I've been writing for this for a little bit, then I'm going to fix that. But hopefully you feel that I've already been trying to fix this. The wonderful thing about God is even when things seem down, even when we see these projections that are just declining, and I'm seeing people that I love leaving, the thing that I have to remember is the person who loves me the most is watching and saying, I promise it'll be okay. It doesn't feel like it, but I promise it's going to be okay. And sometimes we don't listen to his voice. And it's time to listen. It's time to listen to God say, it's not all down. It's not all bad. We've got a family right here at the Roan Ridge Church of Christ who can start doing something. And we need to start now, tonight. And I hope as people are walking around me, I hope I'm hearing these questions. How are you doing spiritually? And I hope I'm hearing honest answers. And I'm going to ask that question tonight. So be careful if you're going to come up and shake my hand. Maybe that's the way I'll keep the people at bay. It's time. It's time to do what God has called us to do. And to do it with so much vigor that those who are leaving have to turn around and say, am I making the right choice? Tonight, if you need help, if you need to be vulnerable tonight, now is the time. If you are ever going to have the most compassionate crowd in this room, I hope it's going to be tonight after hearing that lesson. That whatever help you need, I've been struggling, this has been going on in my life, I need prayer. I hope you take care of it tonight. And then I hope we keep doing that. but you don't have forever. So take advantage of it while you have the opportunity right now as we stand and as we sing.